This video is brought to you by your contributions on Patreon. Click here if you want to help keep the lights on down at the History Factory. Hey folks, this video is the last in a series of videos I did alongside Cypher, the cynical historian. We've talked about periods where the entire world order was upended, and was never really the same again. This week, we get to the most recent flipping of the geopolitical game board, the last time the world map drastically changed in such a short period. I'm talking about the time when the communist world that began in my last video began to fall apart. It all began in a tumultuous time for the communist world, in the 1970s and early 80s. Even in the good times, the economy was extremely unstable. China had broken ties with Moscow and was now friends with the United States. Ronald Reagan made the relatively peaceful period in the 70s between the United States and the Soviet Union tense up, and the USSR lost not one, not two, but 3 leaders in as many years. The communist world was fiercely conservative and filled with unmoving, inefficient structures that were leaving it further and further behind. This is the world where Mikhail Gorbachev was handed the keys to the second most powerful country in the world. His attempts to bend and reform the communist world would result in its breaking, the creation of 18 new countries, and the death of the Great Soviet Experiment. In 1986, when Gorbachev first took office, he had trouble even knowing where to begin to move this immovable behemoth. In his first year, he dismissed several of the most corrupt leaders, unexiled political dissidents, and allowed the formation of Helsinki 86, the first openly anti-communist group in Soviet history, in Latvia. The next year, he opened up the Communist Party to elections for the first time, sort of like a bunch of primaries with multiple candidates and secret ballots. Political prisoners were freed, and people protested the Soviet order without suppression. Importantly, the Secretary of Moscow, Boris Yeltsin, resigned his commission to be an anti-communist activist, something no Soviet leader had ever done before. On the 48th anniversary of Stalin's invasion of the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they held vigils and sang songs about Stalin's victims. The government denounced it, but did not interrupt. In Armenia, 3,000 people rose up against the environmental hazards, such as nuclear and chemical plants in their country. Things really heated up, though, in 1988. The Baltic republics pressed for their independence, with large popular fronts taking over Estonia and Latvia. The Caucasus broke into war, with violence in Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. Moldova elected a democratic government. Protests broke out in Ukraine, and Belarus was taken over by a popular front of its own. Gorbachev worried about the stability of the communist world, but seemed to think that this was just the pains of his major reforms, glasnost and perestroika, or openness and restructuring. He passed a number of important reforms this year. One key one was the end of the jamming of foreign radio stations just 2 days after I was born. For the first time in decades, the Soviets could hear popular Western music, news, and for the first time, really connected with the rest of the global community. In 1989, the Soviet Union had its first elections since 1917. Gorbachev began a television network that filmed the legislature uncensored for the first time. Between this, the radio, and lack of suppression of protests, citizens were seeing deep cracks in their countries. An experiment in democracy in Poland called the Polish Solidarity Union that existed in some form since 1968 resulted in the toppling of the communist government there that summer. It would be only the first domino, however. Over the next 3 years, all the packed countries, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany, would all overthrow their communist governments. The Berlin Wall would collapse in a matter of days. It became more and more apparent that the people's preference was to dump rather than reform communism. In 1990, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union gave up its monopoly on political power, and all 15 republics had their first competitive elections. Reformers and nationalists won many seats, even beating the Communist Party in Lithuania, Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Armenia, and Georgia. Boris Yeltsin was elected the leader of Russia, beginning a struggle between the Soviet governing body and the Russian governing body. The Baltic states all declared independence. The fence along the border of Iran and Azerbaijan was attacked, and by the end of what is called Black January, the USSR has effectively lost Azerbaijan. The Ukrainians made a 480-kilometer human chain between Kiev, Lviv, and Ivano-Frankivsk to commemorate the declaration of Ukraine's independence in 1918. And then we have the Coda of 1991. A referendum to keep the Soviet Union together passed, but was boycotted in many countries that already declared their independence, as well as Chechnya. Gorbachev tried another round of reforms. He restructured the USSR as a federation of independent states, with one president, foreign policy, and military. In the election for that presidency, he lost to Boris Yeltsin. However, Yeltsin attempted a failed coup that put Gorbachev back, but with much less power. By August, he dissolved the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, basically dissolving the centralized authority in the Union. Between then and December, 10 republics declared independence, out of fear of another coup. By September, Gorbachev's power extended to the borders of the city of Moscow. On December 1st, he got word that Ukraine voted 90% for independence. On Christmas Day, 1991, the red hammer and sickle flag went down over the Kremlin for the last time. There are two main schools of thought as to why the Soviet Union collapsed. Some say that this was the result of Gorbachev's reforms and Yeltsin's activism. The reforms were just too much too fast, and that was the reason why things fell apart. Some, however, think that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the result of deep, structural problems in the Soviet government and economy. Gorbachev's reforms were like pushing over a house of cards. I'd like to know what you think about that in the comments, and if you saw any of these events firsthand, I really want to hear your story. This video is the conclusion of a 6-video series where Cypher, the cynical historian, and I have been discussing world revolutions. If you click on the eye here in the corner, you can see the entire series from episode 1. If this is your first time here and you want to see more videos like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you've already subscribed, consider taking a look at all the perks on Patreon and help make Step Back sustainable with as little as $1 a video. And of course, come back next time for a new Step Back.